Levelling up the country is one of the government's big pledges, but how exactly should that be delivered? A report released today says the best way to increase the wealth of poorer regions is to help clusters of high-value businesses grow, learning from what our industrial history tells us about what cotton and textiles gave Manchester, steel and cutlery gave Sheffield, and pottery gave Stoke-on-Trent. Well, James Palmer is the Conservative mayor and leader of the Cambridgeshire and Peterborough Combined Authority. Dan Jarvis is the Labour mayor for the Sheffield City region, and he'll be speaking at the launch of the Centre for Cities report today. Good morning to you both.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Dan Jarvis, what is the present-day equivalent for Sheffield, the best parallel from Sheffield's industrial history?
Well, it would be advanced manufacturing. But I think the basic point here is that you can't drive a regional economic recovery from the centre. And I think Metro mayors have got an important role to play as we rebuild our regional economies coming out of the pandemic. The reason for that is because we see the opportunities, but also understand the challenges better than anybody in Whitehall could. But what we need the government to do is invest in us. And we need a plan nationally, one that's detailed but adapted to the specific challenges we face in our regions. That requires local leadership to deliver it. But crucially, though, and we haven't seen this yet, we need the resources to underpin it, not just one-off injections of cash, but long-term transformative funding, and we're not close to that at the moment.
I mean, you could certainly argue that you are best placed to say what your region needs, but there are levers that the government can pull. For example, the movement of a government department or a government agency. That is a decision that the government can and on occasion does take, and which immediately brings high-paying, high-value jobs to a particular area.
Absolutely. I very much welcome the announcement that was made a couple of weeks ago about the relocation of parts of MHCLG to the West Midlands. But what we need is an approach that levels up the whole of the country and that invests in our regional economies. We needed to do this before we went into the COVID pandemic, but the need is even greater because the reality is that the economic impact of the pandemic is levelling down those parts of the country that were already deprived, and we're only going to make the sort of transformational types of change that we all want to see if we've got a joined up approach. But that has to be led by the government, and we have to see transformative levels of funding, and that's what we need to see, and we haven't seen it yet.
Dan Jarvis, you were saying a moment ago about levelling up the whole country and looking really broadly at it, but how closely are you going to be tracking exactly where investment decisions go from central government, given that, there's clearly going to be a big ambition to hold on to the old red wall, now blue wall Conservative seats?
Well, we're obviously looking at that very closely, and I think there's been some smoke and mirrors in terms of the funding that so far has been announced. The government said it was putting £600 million into the Levelling Up Fund in the next financial year, but that's less money than would have been available under the original arrangements. I think James made an important point about education, because we often talk about levelling up exclusively in the context of the economy. And of course, the economy is absolutely fundamentally important. But for me, the levelling up agenda has to be much wider than that. It has to be about reducing the very long-standing health inequalities that COVID has shone a light on. It's about educational attainment. It's about opportunities for training and skills. So the economy is a fundamental part of this, but it needs to be a much broader agenda.